Good morning. Welcome to Coffee with Enlace. It's so great that you're here with us today. Thank you for taking the time out, either live to watch us or even later as you tune in. We really appreciate you checking out the website and getting online with us. Today we have a very special show. I'm so excited to have Rusty and Jeff Galley here, Rusty Pritchard and Jeff Galley with me. I'm going to introduce them in a few seconds here, but they've been a part of this amazing collaborative effort that we started putting together. In fact, it really started in March, these conversations, and it's developed, and then COVID hit, so we're all kind of rushing around what we can do together. But we're going to focus today specifically on this new collaborative effort that Tearfund, World Relief, Life Church, Convoy of Hope, Enlace, Viva are trying to actually do in Central America in response to the COVID-19 virus. So we're going to talk about that collaborative effort, and then also hopefully get you to participate in a webinar that we're doing on June 30th that we want to invite you to. So that's where we're going today. But before we do that, let me introduce myself. For you that don't know me, my name is Ron Bueno, the co-founder of Enlace, and I get the privilege of hosting today. Usually it's Joel that does this. So, you know, in memory of him, I've got my collar shirt on and I'm ready to go here, and I'm hopefully going to facilitate this conversation. But like I said, I've got two really recent friends of mine, but two extraordinary people. We met in March on a trip through Central America, and just, it seems like almost, and I know this maybe sounds cliche or whatever, but almost immediately, the conversations went deep, fast, and everything from, the church and poverty in Central America to birds, to baseball, to office episodes. You know, it just all became really intense, really fast, but it was so much fun to meet both Jeff and Rusty, and I do really admire both of them. Jeff Galley is a pastor at Life.Church. He is over life groups as well as mission engagement at Life.Church. Jeff has an MA in organizational leadership from Colorado State University. He serves on the board of directors at the Chalmers Center for Economic Development and also Tearfund in the U.S. and is facilitator of Development Associates International, MAOL, which I want you to explain here, Jeff, in a second program. Right. Jeff and his wife, Christy, live in Oklahoma City, and they have 3 adult children, 1 son-in-law and 1 daughter-in-law. And I love the fact that in your bio, you put the son-in-law. I don't think I've ever seen that before. So you either, I mean, that's really special, man. If I got in as a son-in-law, I would be very, very excited. So
yeah, he's in.
Thank you. And then next to Jeff, we got Rusty Pritchard. Rusty is vice president of Tearfund USA. For many of you, you probably do have heard of Tearfund. They've been around for, I don't know, 70, 80 years, and Rusty can fill us in on that. But they're based out of the UK. They work in over 50 countries around the world. And really, of all the organizations that, as Enlace, the ones that I've been following and trying to model off and learn off of more than any other organization has been Tearfund. They believe in church-based community transformation. They do it really well. They're incredible at training and providing materials for leaders all over the world, facilitating forums. So it's really a privilege to have both of you here with us this morning.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. It's great to be with you.
Oh, well, thank you. And Rusty's a huge bird guy. He's part of you were president of the Audubon, right? Society in Georgia?
I'm on the board of Georgia Audubon, that's right.
And then you have how many kids, Rusty?
Got 3 kids, 1 in college and 1 in high school, 1 in middle school. So good spread. And they're all bird fans too. They can recognize every bird around us by sight and by sound. It's just amazing.
And no daughter-in-law, so you can't put that in your bio yet.
Not yet.
All right.
I told my son he needed to wait until at least his junior year before he got married.
Oh, there you go. Nice. And then some of them are doing victory gardens, right? They've been working on gardens with.
My high schooler and my middle schooler have really worked hard to transform our backyard into a vegetable garden. And they've been out there working in the blazing sun every day. And it's now bursting into bloom and bud and fruit. And it's amazing.
Oh, that's I want to go. I want to go to there.
It was a good pandemic project.
Yeah, the things that we do in COVID, huh? That's going to be like several memoirs, I think, being written here pretty soon. But let's jump into this conversation. As I mentioned earlier, we had the privilege in early March to travel in a van together. We started in Guatemala, met incredible pastors, church leaders who are doing incredible stuff. I mean, amazing stuff in their communities. We met with representatives of Tearfund, Enlace churches, and and then got in a van and drove all the way to El Salvador together. Nice long wait at a border because, as we didn't know, they were already starting to do COVID checks. And as soon as we got in, basically they closed the border. I mean, I think you guys got out the next day or that night to go to Honduras. But it was really a first shot for me to meet Rusty and to Jeff and Jeff, and to actually hear their hearts for Central America, hear kind of what their organizations have been doing, how their church, how Life Church has been kind of putting together, how they wanted to work in Central America. So maybe, Jeff, if we could start off with you, just kind of give me, maybe you can describe to me how interest in Central America kind of evolves in you personally, in the church. Why is Central America important to you and as a church?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. Well, for a long time, our church has made a priority to do whatever we could do to come alongside the local church in places all over the world, as local churches play a role in bringing transformation to their local communities, in particular in places around the world that are experiencing the most extreme poverty. And so I'm going back, excuse me, probably a year and a half ago, I got to know Mark Hagen, who is also now on the team at Enlace. And this was before he was on the team. He was still working on the team at Willow Creek at that time. And Mark and I struck up a friendship because we both I'm in a similar role that he was in on the team there at Willow Creek. And so that's kind of where our friendship started. And then when Mark became involved on the staff team there at Enlace, we kept that connection. And I just began to learn more about the context that Enlace works in Central America. And then combined with that, you all will remember last year, there was so much energy here in the U.S. around the border crisis. And all of that led to the question, okay, how should our church be engaging specifically in Central America? What should we understand? What should we know about the border crisis? I think I understand it, but I probably don't fully understand it. That was my thought process. So I want to learn. And that led to actually a roundtable back in August in Chicago that Mark and a group of us organized together to just learn what's going on in Central America, what's going on in regards to the border crisis, and how should our church respond? What role should we be playing in all of that? And for our church at Life Church, the big takeaway for us is that our best response is to stay the course in walking alongside the church in Central America, because ultimately people want to be safe, they want to thrive, they want to have economic opportunity at home. And so that's where we've chosen to put our energy, is let's consider how can we walk alongside the church in Central America as the church there in Central America leads the way in creating transformation. And so that led to, let's learn how we can do that. And then the next step was spending a week together in March when we were down in Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. And so coming out of that week, the commitment I think we all felt was, okay, we all have a role to play. We believe in collaboration. We believe in working together. I think we're going to talk about that here in a little while. So what's next? And then the coronavirus pandemic hit, and that it kind of changed our plan, but accelerated our plan. So that kind of brings us a little bit to where we are at this point. Long term, as a church, to go back to your question, Ron, we're committed to supporting the local church in Central America as it creates transformation in whatever role we can play. And in the short term, what the church needs from us is to be there to help meet the immediate food needs. And so today that's clear, but it's not just today's thing, it's a long-term commitment that we're beginning to make. So those are a few thoughts.
Well, thank you. I think as we kind of ventured on that in that van and had multiple conversations together, one of the things that came up, I think, was the fact that I think for many years there was a lot of focus from U.S. churches and organizations in Central America. But really since 80, 90, that attention has kind of gone elsewhere. And so you kind of, to me, it's exciting to see how it is that we as a church can think about what is going on in Central America and how can we kind of re-engage or engage effectively. Now, Tearfund, Rusty, has been in Central America for, you told me the other day, but it's like 60 years or 50 years or something. Could you tell me a little bit about what you guys have done in Central America? What is the role of Tearfund and why it's important to you?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Great to be on this podcast with you. I'm really excited to talk with you because when we were traveling around in that van, I think we just, as you said, we found so many points of common ground, so many ways in which our organizations work in the same way. So it's a real privilege to be part of this conversation. Tearfund's worked since the 1970s in Central America. It started in 1968, so this is our 52nd year working. We work in about 50 countries around the world. And Central America and Latin America is one of those regions that has really benefited Tearfund in terms of a theology of what we call integral mission. And we learned from folks like Rene Padilla and John Stott, who were both significant figures in Tearfund's early history, what it meant to really preach a holistic gospel, that God wasn't here just on a rescue mission to whisk souls away to heaven so they could live a disembodied existence forever, but that he actually, through the work of Jesus on the cross, is transforming and reconciling all things here. And I was part of a church growing up in the US that didn't really understand the depths of the gospel. We had a pretty truncated view of what the gospel was. I was a sinner, Jesus came to rescue me, I get to go to heaven when I die. The thought that he rescued me to be transformed and to live a life of participating with him in the restoration and reconciliation of all things was good news that came to me in my 30s and 40s. And what Tearfund has found is that there are so many churches working already, serving the poorest of the poor, but often with a sense of compassion or generosity or charity, and they don't really understand their work in poverty alleviation, their work in resolving structural injustices as part of their new identity in Christ. And when they get that message, it unleashes the potential of the church to effect transformation in their communities. It turns them inside out. And I heard this from so many Enlace churches when we were visiting them together, that church is not about what goes on inside these four walls. So Tearfund's model of development is not so much anymore direct relief work, although we shift to that mode whenever we need to. It is to empower and encourage local churches to be the hands and feet of Jesus and to resolve their own problems, to take responsibility for their own communities, and to be managers of development, to be in the driver's seat rather than passengers that are waiting for some outside charity to come alongside them and offer them some assistance or offer them a project to be a part of. So Tearfund's work in Latin America and especially in Central America is very much about that. We talk about helping churches embody a vision for what it means to do integral mission, the holistic gospel, everything. And in that sense, I feel like we're really kindred spirits within Lasse, because I saw that exactly played out in the pastors and the church leaders that we met, because they had really embodied that themselves. They were themselves transformed and understood what it meant to have a new identity in Christ, and then their churches were transformed. So they weren't sitting around waiting for things to happen to them. They were making things happen.
Thank you. And it always reminds me, like, wait a minute. I feel like you're saying exactly what I wish I could have said and articulated in the way that you did, because it's just such a close fit. Now, both you guys mentioned
channeling my inner Ron Bueno there.
No, I think it's the opposite. I'm like absorbing the outer Rusty there.
But I wanted to say just a word about why Central America is so important to us as Tearfund. And I think we lost Jeff. I hope he's going to be back on in a minute. But Central America is one of these places that, as you said, the U.S. church and its focus has shifted away from Central America, except as a point of crisis, except as a sense of threat for the big immigration crisis unfolding on our southern border. And we're not so much thinking about coming alongside the church in Central America anymore. It is a destination for short-term mission trips because plane tickets are cheap and you can go down there and come back and feel like you've helped out one or two people, and yet there's so much more going on in Central America that we're not really aware of as the U.S. church, and we haven't been thinking about. It's the left behind region in Latin America in terms of poverty alleviation. Poverty's gone down about 9% in Central America in the last 20 years. It's gone down 30 or 40% in the rest of Latin America. So it's being left behind. It also has this unlucky geography of being in between drug growing regions and drug consuming regions, which is us, the US. Like, our drug habit is fueling violence and corruption and injustice all over Central America. And the church there is the one that's left holding the bag. They've got to deal with those things unfolding in their society. So it's a region where there's tectonic shifts economically and socially, and in terms of criminal justice and in terms of human rights. And it's also a place, as you well know, Ron, of tectonic shifts with big earth plates colliding and creating disasters from volcanoes. And it's a place where natural disasters are ripe. In terms of the climate risk index that one major organization publishes, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, they're right up there at the very top of the most at-risk countries from climate change. So Tearfund is very concerned about helping churches there be the hands and feet in terms of restoring and rehabilitating creation so that farmers can have productive farms and people can lead healthy lifestyles.
Well, thank you for providing that context too. That's really helpful to think through kind of the bigger challenges, the socioeconomic and political and kind of the environmental challenges of Central America. Because I think I agree with you. Those four countries you mentioned are precarious at every level, politically, socially, economically. And you see it just with continual kind of unrest, kind of circling around at different levels in the countries. And it's definitely an area of huge need. Now, both of you talked about the role of the church. Jeff introduced kind of his jumping into the journey of Central America, starting from his belief in the church. Why is the church so critical for you, Jeff? I mean, in other words, what is the role of the church in community transformation, and why is it so important?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the starting point, the obvious, is that the church is God's plan to create an institution that transforms individuals, families, and communities. So just as a starting point, all of us who are followers of Christ are committed to the church. We believe in it because it's God's plan. But I think there are really practical implications of the role that churches play in a community and the role that churches play in creating transformation. I think that there's probably nobody that has been able to break this down and describe it in a more practical way than Brian Fickert in his latest book called Becoming Whole. And I just love some of the concepts that he really fleshes out, and the way he explains the role of a local church in a community. And so the way he approaches it, I think, is just a good way to answer that question. And it's to think about how communities actually change. There's four factors that Brian Fickert says work together. And as I've traveled the world and seen the work that Enlace and Tearfund and many other partners do, I just see this playing out over and over and over again. So I think it's legit. So those four factors are that a community has to think about its story of change. So what is transformation? Like what's their inner belief and an individual's inner belief about what the future might look like? The second is that you have to have individual people who have actually been restored in their relationship with God and their relationship with each other. So those are the first two factors. The third factor is the systems in a community, jobs, the way the economy works, banking, education. So that's the third factor. And then the fourth factor is just practices, habits, routines that a community embraces. So how they meet together, how they learn, how they educate themselves and their community. So if you take those four factors, the way that those four factors go determines the overall trajectory of a community. And the church is instrumental in at least 3 out of those 4. Not instrumental. The church's core, because individual transformation can't happen unless there's spiritual transformation. I mean, it starts with a restored relationship with Christ, and then helping a community envision what change actually looks like can only be informed by what God actually envisions for a community based on the way He created the world in the first place. And then it's churches in both rural and urban communities play such an important role in shaping the routines of a community, the practices, the weekly gatherings, the habits that a community gets in. And so those factors are just critical, and that's the role that the local church plays. And so I don't think it's an accident that God established this institution, nor do I think it's an accident that those factors create change, and those factors are driven by the local church. So I think it's the way God designed change to happen in communities. And so I think, yeah, I hope I didn't go too philosophical on you.
No, I think that sets the groundwork perfectly. I mean, there's no, like you said, there's no other organization with that mandate, right? To restore people to God and to each other, and to express community in the way that God wanted all us to be in. So that's, thank you. And Brad Fickert's book is a really good reference. We'll put that in the little chat area so that people can get to it. Now, Rusty, I know that you guys are, I'm sorry, Glenn.
Well, I was going to just add one more thought. So for the way we look at that as a church here based in the United States is we're not in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. And so we can't play the role of all those things that I just talked about. So our job is to get behind the local leadership, the church that is there, and just serve and offer whatever resources we can to enable them. And so I think that's another important part of the way we look at the role of local church in community transformation.
Yeah, it's very cool. Fantastic. And then Rusty, I know that you guys, it's all about the church and community transformation. I think your program is actually called Church and Community Transformation, one of your core programs. So why is the church so important to Tearfund?
You know, I'll start by saying amen to Jeff. Everything that he mentioned about what Jesus is doing in the world, we believe is true. The church is the center in telling the whole gospel to the whole world. And we want to be a part of that. That's why we come alongside local churches in donor countries like the UK and the US, and in countries where we're doing programmatic work and coming along to envision and encourage those churches to be faithful. They are the center institution, and we are a helper institution. We often get to talk with other secular environment, relief, development organizations, and they're always very curious about the fact that we work with local churches. And they think it's kind of a nifty idea because they see the church as this amazing civil society institution, this source of social capital where you can get a cooperative spirit working, and you can find people that are able to build some capital together. And they see it in really functional terms. And all of that's true, but it's true that it works like that because that's God's plan for it to work like that. As people are reconciled and restored to each other, they are able to work together and accomplish things that none of them could accomplish on their own. Individual self-help does not account for the kinds of community transformations that you see when you dig in and you find a church that's been completely transformed in its mindset about what it's about in the community. So that's really good news. Churches stay there. Like when a hurricane strikes or when there's civil unrest and you hear on the news that such and such a global nonprofit has evacuated all of its employees and American embassy staff are being asked to come back to the embassy, and the church is not going anywhere. The church does not evacuate when disasters come. They are there on the ground as first responders, making a difference in their community, helping to rehabilitate and then to recover after those disasters. They are the ones who own the relationship. They know the terrain, they know the people. Everything that happens when we work through the local church is so much more effective than if someone were to try and manipulate it from beyond somewhere or to come alongside the local church and use it just as a staging area for relief and redistribution efforts. When the church is in the driver's seat, everything happens in a magnified way.
Yeah. And I want to jump on what you just said, Rusty, because the driver's seat is the key metaphor. You're so right. So many NGOs around the world see the church as a delivery mechanism. Like it's a structure through which I can implement my strategy, my programs, not as the driver in a community. And there's really a big difference between the two. So I think that's important when a person's trying to understand the role of the church in the community, which is part of the reason that I have become so committed to supporting both Tearfund and Enlace, because that's the approach that you guys take. I mean, Ron, how does that play out for you from your vantage point? Like how does an NGO actually keep the local church in the driver's seat?
Oh, that's a tricky one. But it does start right from your core belief. In other words, we believe that God walks through each community every day. God has a plan for each community. He's placed his church in that community to affect his plan. So our role as a nonprofit is to walk alongside, inspire, share other ideas so that that local church can understand what God wants to do through them in their community. Mm-hmm. So when you look at specifically what that means for driver, that you said in the driver's seat, what that means is that the church leaders are meeting with church community leaders. They're identifying their problems together. They're defining what opportunities they have together. They're building, they're designing, they're building their own initiatives. They're going to be sustainable. It's not an organization from outside saying, hey, we've got this project. Do you want to do this in your community? Or we've got this program. Would you host it out of your church? But rather, it's really helping the church to build those relationships with the community, identify what are those greatest needs, and then work together so that they're actually driving it. And I think as a nonprofit, it's tricky. You've got to continue to respond and let the church and community go at their own pace, but then also provide the right resources at the right moment for them to continue to stay engaged and be successful. I think, Rusty, you wanted to add something there.
Ron, I saw it played out in the churches that we visited that were Enlace churches and Tearfund churches on our trip in Central America, that the churches that are envisioned with the whole gospel see themselves not just as organizing the church for the sake of the church, and not just as a charitable institution changing the lives of the few people that it touches around the church, but as a key influencer and advocate for justice in their communities. So as they start to do good poverty alleviation work in their local community, local government leaders see it and pay attention to it, often want to emulate it, want to see it propagated throughout their areas of authority. And churches then have a platform to speak to the government authorities about who they're ignoring, who they're leaving out in social service provision, and whether the money that's entrusted to local governments from taxes is actually being well used, and to have a voice that then people have to listen to. And so I know that Enlace churches are awesome at beginning to use their voice on behalf of the oppressed and the marginalized, and holding those government authorities responsible for doing the right thing, for doing justice.
Yeah, we call it flipping the arrows around. Instead of the community always just getting what the government is willing to offer, have the church and community say, this is what we want, this is what we need, and could you respond to us? Can you walk alongside us? And I think the beauty of that is when the government or any even nonprofit see that the church and community have buy-in and they own it, and they're gonna contribute to it, I think it's a win-win for everybody. So if you can flip those arrows around, then you can really leverage everyone's kind of resources and talent and really see a long-term change in the community, which I think when you get that spinning, that's when it gets fun, at least for me. You start really seeing some change happen.
Ron, from my standpoint as a church leader in the U.S., I think it's important that all of us that are coming from this perspective give you the freedom to play that role, that supportive role with churches in Latin America, instead of imposing what we want to experience and what we want to see in our partnership with churches in Latin America, because then real quickly, I think we can begin to impose our wishes and, our desires. But our role, we've got to use a lot of self-restraint, a lot of self-discipline, and just stay back and let you support you, and as you're walking alongside those churches, so that they really do stay in the driver's seat. What I'm trying to say is we play a role in that too. As U.S. resourcing churches, we got to understand our role and stay in our lane and not get out of our lane.
Well, can you maybe you can explain a little bit more of that, Jeff? You guys have a very different understanding of even missions at Life Church, and I think it has to do a lot with just the way that you process and think about. And once again, I don't know a lot about the church. I've only met you and a couple other amazing staff. But, tell me, I know that you've kind of been thinking about what is the role of the church in collaborating and partnering. What is effective partnership? What does that look like? What is the role you guys? Could you just flesh out a little bit of that that you were just talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly not the expert and have way more questions than answers. I think I would go probably in two different directions from the way you set that question up. The first is that we really, as a church, we really don't want to actually be physically present in the communities that you're working in within LASE or that Tearfund is working in, other than a very occasional trip to learn. So we talked about the trip in March. There were there were 4 people from our team here. And we went just to sit and listen. And all we did for 4 or 5 days is listen to church leaders talk and hear their stories and ask questions. And that's it. And we're not going to be going back with a group of people, hoping to do projects or construction trips or, any kind of a campaign, because we just feel like that moves us out of our lane. That's the lane that the local church should be in. And our role is just to say, how can we be supportive? How can we obviously be supportive financially? But interestingly, the role that we feel like we can play is with financial support is not paying for stuff, but it's investing human capital. Because that's a role that you play within LASE. That's a role that you play with Tearfund in a local community, is you're investing human capital to help church leaders connect with each other, help church leaders learn new ways of thinking and understanding what being a church that represents the full gospel actually is in a community. And then there's not a need to actually pay for development projects for the long term, because those leaders then can begin to sit in the driver's seat, tap into their own local resources for the long term. So we want to invest in human capital that creates ongoing sustainable capacity in local churches. So that's part of the role that we feel like we can play. So those are a few thoughts. Now, another role that we hope to be able to play is sparking collaboration. And that's more on the NGO or the nonprofit side, which I don't know if you're ready to get into that. We can talk about this collaboration around the COVID-19 response.
Yeah, please.
That's
and
great.
Then I'll have Rusty add on to that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So as we begin to walk with the church in Latin America, we want to do that alongside multiple partners who have the same vision, the same values that are driving their approach, and think, okay, what can we do together? Because that allows organizations to learn from each other. It avoids duplication of efforts. Instead of multiple nonprofits working with the same churches or the same church networks, if there's some coordination, you can go in different directions, learn from each other, work together, but you have the opportunity to serve more churches. So it avoids duplication of efforts and ultimately becomes more effective and more efficient. And those things for us are very, very important. So collaboration is key. And so then when COVID hit, probably 2 months ago, we began to hear from LASE, from Tearfund, from Convoy of Hope, and then eventually from Viva, about the need for helping churches ensure that people just have food to get through the summer. Once the fall hits, there's an expectation or a hope that the lockdowns are going to ease and people are going to begin to be able to work. But right now, there's a pretty big crisis and people need food. Churches are have extended everything they can, but they're tapped out. And so the exciting thing is all of you came together and thought, okay, how can we coordinate our response? How can we be sure that we're not duplicating efforts? Let's think about how to resource this so it keeps the costs a little bit lower. And
Rusty, did we lose Jeff on that, I think? I think I've lost both of you now here. I'm not sure.
I'm
Oh,
here.
okay. Okay, good.
Jeff
So-
is
So
frozen.
Jeff, I'm sorry, we lost you for a second. Just go back and say, you were saying, how can we maximize our resources together is where we lost you.
Okay. I'm sorry. I
all right.
apologize, guys. I think I have a weak connection here. I don't know where I dropped off. I don't know how far back I need to go, but I think I had gotten into the response to the COVID need.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
The advantages of working
So-
together.
Great. So all the partners began to figure out a plan. How can we work together? How can we coordinate our response to keep the costs low, to not duplicate efforts? And that's the kind of response we want to get behind. And it's a little easier to do in a crisis like this because you have a very simple goal of let's make sure people have enough food to eat. But that's that kingdom-minded, teamwork-oriented, collaborative approach is going to endure for the long term. And for all the reasons that I just mentioned a minute ago, it's going to make us more effective and efficient together. So we're excited to get behind it now.
It is really a unique approach of a U.S. church saying, hey, we need to resource what's happening on the ground by training people, but also we need to see how we can kind of mobilize other people and work together to be effective. To me, it's something that I think we all need to be learning more. And as Jeff writes his books and puts his articles out there, whatever, then we'll gravitate towards pulling you into more and getting more from you, Jeff. But maybe, Rusty, could you tell us a little bit about then what is actually happening on the ground right now in Central America, kind of how, what the goals are and kind of what we hope to accomplish as organizations?
Yeah. Thanks, Ron. There's a lot of folks who, before COVID struck, families where the wage earner went to work one day and used that money to feed his family or her family for the next day or two. And with the lockdown that is so strictly enforced in Central America, that source of income is just cut off. And folks are left on their own resources and family resources, which begin to run out immediately. And local churches have been on the front lines responding to that already, and their resources are beginning to run out. So our 4 organizations have come together to provide a link between the U.S. church and local churches in Central America, who, if we can provide them resources right now to get through the summer, we're looking to provide 5 million meals to people for the next 3 months and span that gap before we hope things start to get better. And it's not just that we are procuring supplies and dropping them off randomly from helicopters all over these countries. We are working through churches that are already envisioned and that are already the hands and feet of Jesus, that are already meeting needs in their communities and enabling them to have the tools they need to continue that work so that when time comes for the lockdowns to be lifted and for recovery to begin to take place and for pastoral care to deal with the trauma that's occurred in so many households because of a loss of income, because of loss of opportunities, because of a rise in household violence in some places where people are locked in very intense situations together. Churches will be positioned to provide that pastoral care. And they do that through the process of distributing relief supplies. This is a really good example of where we can get behind what local churches are already doing. We're not having to go and recruit churches who have never, ever done anything for their local community before. These are churches that are well rehearsed, they're well regarded in their communities. And if we can help them, we can make a huge difference in the future prospects in Central America.
Thank you, Rusty. And to me, I think the exciting thing about this for us as an organization, as Enlace, is that all 4 of these organizations, including Life Church as well, because I'd say you guys are part of this, although you're not going to be implementing, as you were clarified. And even World Relief, who's now supporting, kind of promoting and really getting behind the collaboration. the exciting thing is to help these churches go from 3 to 5 to 6 months to 18 months to how can your community look different in 30 years? And all of us are committed to going, wait a minute, this is the first step. We need to get people, at least being able to feed themselves and provide some basic hygiene packages. But how can you start thinking about improving ag so that they can feed themselves? How can you strengthen, through micro enterprise development and loans? How could you help them change really what their communities look like into the future? So for me, it's exciting to think that this is, hopefully for us, we're excited because this is like the beginning of a new collaboration that we hope will last, into the coming years. If any of you are excited about this conversation, if you're wanting to know more about what's happening currently in Central America, how the U.S. situation is also impacting Central America, or hearing more about what the churches are doing in direct response, we have a webinar that we'd like to invite you to. It's going to be June 30th at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. It's going to be a 1 hour or 60-minute webinar where we're going to have speakers from Central America, from some pastors in the States. It's going to be a great time to learn more about the issue and to see how you or your church can get engaged directly in meeting this goal of 5 million meals that we want to help churches provide for their communities. That's June 30th, and all the information will be on the screen. That's Tuesday, June 30th. The actual webinar is called Standing with Central America, The Church Unites During COVID-19. We're going to be sending out save the dates. It'd be great if you could register so that we can know how many are there, and then your spot can just easily click on once you get to the webinar. So please, if you want more information, you can write us in the chat, or write us to any of the groups, Jeff or Rusty or Asad and Lassie. We will be providing more information the next 4 or 5 days regarding that webinar. Finally, thank you to Life Church, who has agreed to kind of host not only this event. I mean, Jeff, you guys have an incredible team. I'm just telling you, Austin and everyone that we've met with, Sam, phenomenal. I mean, just incredible comm team. And it's just been incredible. But they're helping us host this event through their website. But they've also been so gracious to host the fund. So whatever is able to come in for this effort, whether it's through this directly or others, and or during the webinar or post-webinar events, everything will come into Life Church, and they've agreed to distribute it to the 4 organizations that are partnering on the ground. But if you want to give right now or want to know more about that fund, it's already set up. Once again, Life Church is on it, and they're ahead of the curve always on this stuff. But you can go to www.life.church/Central America/ and once again, that will be on the screen right now for you to look at. But that's a direct landing page where you can donate today. Many of the churches and communities and organizations around are already working. We've been working for 6-8 weeks. So as soon as the money comes in, it'll be literally placed in 6-7 days. Your money will be on the ground and working. So if you can, please consider praying, pray about it, and consider giving directly to this link. Once again, thank you so much, Jeff, for all that you and your church are doing for Central America and for hosting this event. You guys have been incredible partners already. We appreciate who you are and your leadership with the church, and just even the way you're thinking about collaboration for me is like a breath of fresh air. It is really encouraging to me as a nonprofit leader in Central America. Rusty, thank you so much for joining this conversation. It's always so great to hear from Rusty. You guys, if you ever get a chance to sit down with either of them, please do. I know that they're extremely busy, but both of them are just like mounds of information and just tons of experience. And Rusty, it's so great to have you on the show. Thank you for sharing about Tearfund. Thank you for all that you guys are doing as Tearfund. I know Tearfund USA is fairly new on the scene. So if you want more information, go to their website. They're doing incredible stuff as they kind of position. The organization has been around forever, but as they position themselves in the States, I think it's 4 years, Rusty, that you guys have been around?
We're in our 2nd year right now.
Oh, 2nd year, sorry. So it's even newer. So please go check out their website. And I mentioned earlier, they have some amazing resources on there. And if you go to the main Tearfund and look for resources, they have great manuals on how to equip churches, mobilize churches. There's a great manual called Church and Community Transformation that's phenomenal. So all those resources are on there for anyone watching. If you're either a church leader that wants to do better community development work, or you're a pastor wanting to know how to support churches on the ground more, that material's there. So thank you to the both of you for being willing to give up of your time to be on the show. Jeff, would you mind closing this off by praying for us? And then we'll say goodbye.
Yeah, you bet. I'd love to. Father, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here together with these friends, with Mark and Rusty, but with everybody who's watching this on Facebook or wherever they find this video. And I want to ask that you would provoke an amazing, generous outpouring response of funding for this project. Lord, give us the ability to be there, to stand in solidarity with churches all across Latin America in this time where they really need us in a very specific way. Just pray for a generous response. Blow us away with the response, Lord. And I pray that you would continue to enable all of us to understand how to play the role we need to play, to understand our lane, where we can fit in alongside other kingdom-minded, teamwork-oriented partners, other nonprofits, other churches that are resourcing churches, other churches in Central America that are day after day working to bring about transformation. Enable us to understand how we can work together to be involved in ultimately what you're doing to restore individuals and families and communities to all that you created them to be. And just look forward to all that you have in store for us. In your name, amen.
Amen. Well, thank you again, Jeff. Thank you, Rusty.
Yeah.
I pray you guys have a great day.
We appreciate you guys, and it's a privilege to be with you. Thanks for letting us walk alongside you.
Oh, this is phenomenal. Thank you. Thank you. And I can't wait for COVID to get down, because I got to get to Atlanta and I got to get down to Oklahoma City to hang out. So thank you again. God bless you guys. Thanks for all your work.
Yep. See you.